Thank you very much for coming. It's a pleasure seeing everyone. In addition to the classes that we've done on Genesis 1 till the 9th verse, 23 classes, people ask that we should do a few classes just on subjects, because by the time we get there, who knows where we'll be up to. Come and just sit down. You can sit anywhere. Okay, so I decided the first subject we'll do is the Akeida. The Akeida is a story of Abraham and Isaac going on Mount Moriah, and it's something that everyone has heard different stories about. It's a nice story, but it has a lot of questions that are not really answered. And a lot of people try to make up answers, create answers, because of questions they have, but none of it actually goes back to what the Hebrew actually says. It's all what people imagine. Like everything else, it's what we imagine. When we imagine it, then we think the words are saying what we say, even though the words may not say that. So, it's very interesting that no one has really, at least in English that I know of, put this together. So we will find out that it's a different story. There is an ancient adage that if you want to hide something, you put it in plain sight. And this definitely applies to the story of Abraham and Isaac. In fact, it applies to the whole Torah itself, because the whole Torah are words that conceal within them a variety of dimensions. And unless you know what those dimensions are, you have no clue what you're reading, and that's the way most people read it. So, in the story of Abraham and Isaac, there are many different things which we will discuss in detail as we go through the words. And I've had to do 3 classes because it will take all night otherwise. So, for example, they call it a test. It actually wasn't a test, and we'll find the word there. They say he was told to slaughter his son. He was never told such a thing. He was told to elevate him. And so people say, well, he misunderstood God. Well, actually, he didn't misunderstand. He knew exactly what he was told to do, to elevate. And I've always found it fascinating that people say he misunderstood, because if you're told by someone else, you can misunderstand, but direct, there's no such a thing as misunderstanding. So that tells me more about the people giving the interpretation than what it says. And I find that throughout interpretations that they actually tell you more about the person than what it says. There are a number of other things which we'll go through. For example, an altar. Normally people say you sacrifice an animal on an altar. Well, if you look, you'll see by Abraham, by Jacob, wherever it says he built an altar, it doesn't say he sacrificed an animal. It says, Vayikra b'Shem Hashem, he called in God's name, he prayed there. So an altar was not for sacrifice, it was for prayer. And so we'll go through the whole thing. There are many questions that commentaries bring and people have on it, and they'll be answered when you see the words in a deeper or different way. So for those few who've been granted vision using the same letters and words that everyone else uses, they can travel through dimensions to open, close vibrations or a frequency. Such people can traverse various planes with ease and keep balance in each place. But for most people, they cannot keep a balance in one dimension. So traversing dimensions will only create more imbalance. And that's why people are blocked from it, because they can't get it straight where they are. So if you really want to connect with God, you have to get it straight where you are, as best as you can, and then things open up for you. The reason people were kept in the dark as to deeper meanings and power that can be harnessed through vibration was for the people's and for the earth's protection. Because there are always people who abuse power and cause great havoc and destruction through the power that they become aware of. People think, oh, I know it, I can do it. It's very good that you think you can do it, but doing it brings its own things. So, while the reason for the blockage is valid, mankind has become so self-destructive that with the power that it has and destroyed so much of the world we live in, of the nature, that there's no more reason to hide the hidden power because they've destroyed it already anyway. So now it needs to open up so that people who are able to can rebalance and bring back the power for rebalancing. And as we've spoken at other points, that when you bring light, there's always a balance of negativity that has to be created to balance your light. So a lot of people think they're doing good, but don't realize there's a backlash, there's a creation that has to balance it. But when there's a lot of destruction, when there's a lot of darkness, then you have to bring in the balance, the darkness. So there's no negative to the light and balance you bring, because you're balancing the other. And since people have been so destructive in nature and the world, in every way that they can dream of, we can now bring in light that we couldn't before, because it's only positive and only good. It's rebalancing. So, in order to assist in the journey, for people to understand this journey, the journey of Abraham and Isaac has now come together for people to understand and see the journey. Many people have different perspectives of what happened, but I'm not going to go into all those details. I'll let everyone research and read the books and figure out whatever they want to figure out. That is great. This will take you beyond most of those things and answer a lot of questions without getting into those discussions. Now, there's also a book by a student of the Baal Shem Tov, Yaakov Yosef ben Yehuda, who wrote the whole story as a soul journey, how the soul comes into the body, before it comes into the body, how it comes into the body. And so, in the third class, I intend to go to it to give you a translation of how he explains the whole story as a soul journey, nothing else. And he goes through the words. So, as we mentioned, the story tells you, the way people understand the story tells you more about the people. For example, a decent person cannot imagine the idea of someone being slaughtered or killed. So, people who do imagine it, it tells you that there's an issue there, that there may be good people, but it tells you there's, for some reason they're able to imagine, another person can't imagine it. So there's reasons why some people imagine things, others can't. People have different feelings, but we're not going to go into a psychoanalysis of everyone and everything here. And especially as I found out that when people say things and they say one word and you can analyze the whole person through the word they say, they don't understand or they see it. So I'm not going to go into that today anyway. Anyway, the story of Abraham, which in Hebrew say Avraham or Avraham, and his son Isaac, which we say Yitzchak or Yitzchak, reflects a spiritual journey of elevation. No matter what the details, the translation, the explanation, it's invariably a story, a journey about a journey of spirit. The common translations are reflective of the lowest vibrations possible associated with the words of the story. And it's generally told and studied in a very physical manner. And the spirituality is mainly based on physical or lower vibration perception. Thus, the spiritual comments that you find of the story are also of a lower realm or frequency, and they are considered physical as well. From a higher spiritual realm, most of what people think is spiritual, it is spiritual, but in relationship to higher spiritual realms, it's actually physical. It's different. The Hebrew words reflect something much beyond the common translation. And they will take us closer to the understanding of Abraham and Isaac and the journey they actually went on. The deeper journey is actually reflected in Hebrew manuscripts all over in bits and pieces, and so I've collated and brought as much as I can together for the class. It's not complete. There's a lot more, but for now I think it will be suffice to give us an insight, to give us more help to go deeper in at later points. Since the word Torah means guidance, So every story in Torah is not about what happened exactly, and the Torah is not exact in a lot of details, although in some things it does say things. The Torah is there as a guidance to teach us lessons. So if you learn lessons of how to be a decent person, a good person, that's really the main thing. And these lessons are written all over, books and books of what people think the lessons are from the stories, and it's great. One little lesson is that you have the angel telling Abraham that God does not want a child sacrifice. So one thing is very clear: God does not want anyone sacrificed or killed. That's a definite and clear lesson from the story. It was very common in pagan societies to sacrifice a child because they felt this did whatever it did. It was greater than the physical life. But the Torah teaches us that the Creator who created the universe and the world does not want a child sacrificed. A second lesson is that we do exactly as we hear without adding our own interpretation to it. You see, Abraham did what he thought he heard. Even those that say he misheard, but he did according to what he heard. He didn't question it. It's very easy to question. He didn't. He went ahead and just did what he thought he was supposed to do. For those who think he misunderstood, he didn't question and did what he thought he misunderstood. For what we'll see is he did exactly what he had to do and understood it, and you'll see why he didn't question anything. Any questions? There's a verse in Nehemiah chapter 9, which says, "You found his heart faithful before you." There are many commentaries on the verse, and they explain that this refers to Abraham, who passed the tests. In fact, what the verse means is that he didn't have any blockage in his heart. The layer that covers the heart of many people did not exist by Abraham. So in Ezekiel chapter 11 and chapter 36, it says, "The layer that covers the heart will be removed from everyone in the future." But till then, there are many people that have blockages. So when it says there's a heart of stone, I'll remove a heart of stone and put a heart of flesh, people often wonder what that means, but a heart of stone means a heart that's blocked, and a heart of flesh means a heart that feels and is open to feeling God directly without any blockage. That's essentially what it means. The accepted traditional rule of Torah is to first read everything in its common meaning or lowest frequency. In other words, the common translation is as far away as possible from the true spiritual power and letter of each word. And a person starts there, and from that point they go on a journey to go deeper and deeper into it. This is not commonly done because most people study one vibration, one way of reading, and they get stuck there in one dimension. Whether they turn themselves off or are turned off, they don't know where to go for deeper meaning. They think they know it. The whole life they stay in that space. Now, this is one of the interesting things of education. Educating a child or yourself does not mean you have to straight away know everything the way it is. A very important part of education is knowing the exact opposite of what you think you want to be or know. By knowing the opposite, you know where your balance is. If you don't know the opposite, you don't know if you're balanced. So starting from the other end and going through a journey, a negative journey, a challenge, a difficult thing, it teaches you things about life. So that when you come to a place, you understand your balance and you can appreciate it. If you don't have that journey, you have no real appreciation of where you are. And what happens is, after a while, you abuse that balance because you don't understand it. But if you had the journey, you know how not to abuse it. Now, since each word in Hebrew has many different levels of meaning, as we go through it, you'll feel yourself opening to seeing different things, and that in itself is very elevating. You'll open your hearts and your mind to possibilities often beyond the scope of your present vision. It'll expand you to see that the Torah has many meanings far beyond what people claim to know. The purpose, as we mentioned before, of this explanation is not to be perfect, even though I'm a Virgo, but I've learned that nothing is 100% perfect. Everything has where you get up to, and then there's always beyond it. So it's maybe perfect in one sense, but it's not 100% perfect. So if you have questions, you're welcome to ask, and if you want to seek and learn more, that's wonderful. That's what it is. This is just to help you in the journey that I've been on and you're on probably too. It will bring out the powers of Abraham. We'll discuss some of the powers of Abraham and Isaac that have been kept secret from viewers. In fact, the whole journey as we go through will transform to be a spiritual journey, which it really was, and not a physical journey. In the Zohar and the Kabbalistic Siddur of Rabbi Asher, it describes the event of Abraham and Isaac as fire and water, two opposites. Fire could be desire, harshness. Water could be a surge, a flow, kindness, which in Hebrew is the word shamayim, heaven. Heaven doesn't mean heaven. Heaven means a balance of opposite movement. The word shamayim is made up of two words, fire and water, esh and mayim, two opposite directions in balance and harmony with each other. So here it's about Abraham, who's one type of person, one type of personality, Isaac, another type of personality, going on a journey together in perfect harmony and balance. Now, when it comes to balance, there are many types of balance. When it comes to heaven, there are many heavens. There isn't one balance. And when a person achieves one balance, then something happens. You know, you've done everything, everything's peaceful. It's a quiet before the storm. Something else happens. Something throws a wrench in the work. Something always happens. So it's like when something is going the way it should be, you know something's going to happen. You just don't know what it is. And then the other way also, when something negative is happening, you're surprised when something, hey, it works. It figures out. Things work both ways. And so there are many different balances and imbalances. Let us give a little bit of a background to the story in order to understand where they're coming from. One of the problems in history is the background. People create all these backgrounds and ideas of what happened that are totally delusional illusions based on what a person sees. Most people understand life from what they see or what they experience, or the history that a person taught from their perspective, and they don't realize that never happened. It's very different. So in order to understand what happened, you really have to step out of everything, step out of it to put yourself in that place. It's kind of time travel, and it's also like out-of-body experience. You're going to another place. Now, which is totally fine, but that's the only way to do it. As long as you're stuck in where you are, it's very hard to imagine something else. So that's why I'll give a little bit of a background to what happened before the story of Abraham and Isaac. The belief in one creator existed before Abraham. Traditionally, Melchizedek was Shem, the son of Noah. Malki means the king, Tzedek of righteousness. And he was the king of Sholem of Salem, which was also the place where the school of Shem and Aver was. It was there that Abraham, after his questioning and searching, went to study. It was a school that was a family school for his great-great-grandfather. And that's where he sent his son Isaac. And they all believed in the oneness of the Creator. The difference between them and Abraham is that they grew up with it, and Abraham came to it on his own questioning and understanding. That was a difference. And because he came through his own journey of questioning, therefore he was able to be given a different purpose and journey in that oneness as well. So everyone lived for their own self, my connection with the oneness. Abraham realized that that oneness needs to be shared. It's not just a oneness that you live on yourself. How did he know it needs to be shared? Because he came from the opposite, from idol worshipping. He had to go through a journey, his own journey. And because he went through his own journey, he understood what had to be shared and how to share it. If you don't go through the journey, you think you know what other people need to do, and you'll tell people, you'll preach. You have no clue about the other person because you didn't go through the journey yourself. He did go through the journey. He understood what oneness meant and why people needed it and how they needed it. So he was the first person that acted upon the idea of going out and teaching the oneness to people and sharing his knowledge with the world at large. So this is a little bit of a background. He wasn't the first person who understood the oneness. He was the first person that had a journey and that knew about sharing it. Abraham, yes?
How did he come to that awareness? He grew up in an atmosphere of idolatry.
He grew up in an atmosphere of adultery, that's correct, and he questioned his own way of life. He said, what are these idols? People are bowing to stones, people are believing in things that are in other worlds, not here. The person has to live a life with what they are. And these people are believing in stuff they've made up. So he realized there's something wrong, so he went on his own journey. And this is part of the problems in beliefs today. A lot of people believe in things because they've been told you believe in it. Everyone else around them believes in it, so it must be true. But it's as far from the truth as one extreme to the other, heaven and earth. People don't realize that if you don't use your own mind, you don't mind that you don't use it. And you're allowing the negativity to control you. You're allowing others to control you because you don't use your own mind. The fact that you can quote verses and sentences and what people say doesn't mean you're a person. You can be a computer. We know how good they are. Just unplug them. If they're working.
Do we have any sources that tell of his journey? I mean, besides the Torah and like Midrashim?
Yes, there are many Midrashim and many books that tell of his journeys and the wisdom he knew, the studies, yeah.
Well, I mean, really all you need to know is that he came from an idol-worshipping background. He had difficulties with it, and he came to a new conclusion in life. And went and spread that word and shared that ideology with people, right?
Well, yeah, but
that he made the journey. I mean, how he did it or what soul searching he did was really his own.
Well, that's a separate thing from what she asked. What you actually find in Midrashim is that he was an incredible astrologer. He was strong in astrology. He knew how to interpret everything. And when he went to Egypt, he taught them. In Kastim, what's the English name for Kastim? I don't remember. But they were very much into astrology, and he was very proficient in it. He taught the Egyptians that. We talk about a stone he had. He was very much he knew about stones and healing properties of stones. So you have a lot of things that he knew.
Who taught them? How does someone be self-taught on all these things?
It doesn't matter how he knew. I'm not going to go into how he knew things at this moment, but it describes that he did know these things. I'm just mentioning that he did know a lot of things about nature and the forces of nature and how they worked.
When you say astrology, do you mean astronomy back in them days, or those
well,
two different
at those
things?
times, astronomy and astrology were not separate. It was the same thing.
Okay.
When you read the stars in those times, you read people's nature, you read the effects on the earth, you read everything. There was no separation. These terminologies only recently have been separated.
Okay.
And some know astronomy and astrology as two separate things, but essentially in ancient times they were not. You don't find separation there. People here just like to focus on one thing, which is another interesting thing, because growing up we had doctors who any issue you went to. Now you can only go to this doctor for this thing, that doctor for that thing. So it's a different world we live in.
When you said oneness, when you said Abraham with the oneness, is that something like his oneness? Is it a God awareness in him, or when you say oneness between him and God, or completion within himself, or something?
You want to know what type of oneness? Well, initially he questioned everything using his mind. Okay, and he realized that everything in the world and universe comes from somewhere, and so there has to be a creator. Once he went through with his mind, he also was an intelligent enough person to realize that the mind has limitations, and there's always more than you comprehend. So he was able to get beyond his mind and connect with the heart as well. Because if you want the oneness, your own mind and heart have to work together in harmony. It's not what I was going to go into here, but basically, the mind, many people are in the mind and they're blocked from the heart. The people are very emotional in the heart, not connected with their mind. And people at all different levels. In order for any two things, the mind, the heart and the mind, two people to work together in harmony, to be married or to be friends or whatever it is, you need each person to respect the other one, to accept the other one, not question them, not judge them, just accept, pure exception, love the other one without condition. Okay? So when you have two people that accept each other, love each other, support each other, even though they're different, you have a good relationship, right? The same thing as the heart and mind. The heart has to accept that the mind thinks whatever it thinks. The mind has to accept the heart feels whatever it feels. When they accept each other, there's dialogue. Okay, there's a relationship. And they respect each other. The heart allows the mind to think what it wants. The mind allows the heart to feel what it wants. Then, when the mind thinks or the heart feels, they don't get all crazy or tied up. They listen. You listen. And when you listen, they say, okay, that's a point. Now that you have your point, I have my point, now we have to figure out what we do. Okay? And you do that in your own mind and heart, you can work together. There are ways of balancing this. And in the same way, it's within everything else in creation. If once you can do it in yourself, you can do it in everything. To a lot of people, there's negative and bad and there's good. And if you listen, a lot of these things, the way people see things actually reflects their own issues. And so, if you get that balance yourself, then the world around is balanced too, automatically. And so rather than judge things, you accept everything the way it is. You say, okay, this happened. What can I learn from it? How can I improve? You don't analyze it to the end of the earth and go nowhere, which is very common in today's society. You can be a professor doing that. Goes nowhere. So it's about the balance. Abraham came to a place where he understood the limitation of his mind as well. And he was able to let go of that. So he had a powerful mind, but he had a beautiful heart too. And so he was able to work with the two things. And that's how he was able to see the oneness in creation, in everything. He could see the creator in everything because he saw the balance. The fact that things here are destructive or things are growing here, it's because it's part of a universal balance. And he saw that. He didn't get stuck on just small things, on microscopic things or on one picture. He saw the grand picture where everything works in harmony. Basically. Okay, so it says, as a prelude to the story in Chumash, it says that Abraham made a covenant with Avimelech. According to the story, Avimelech heard about the negative things that his people did, and he did not take responsibility for the actions of his people. He was a ruler and he allowed people to do good or bad, whatever they wanted. Very much like today's leaders who ignore or instigate corruption and atrocities committed in their community, their city, country. Today's leaders are not much different. And Abraham pointed out to him, he said, I didn't know about it. No one told me before today. That's where it seems to be a common thing. I didn't know about it because no one told me till today. Okay, so that's the place he was living. And it says in chapter 21, verse 33, and Abraham, and he, who was Abraham, planted an ashel. An ashel means a place where you can get food, drink, sleep. The word ashel itself is an acronym for food, drink, and sleep, or food, drink, and levia, which is when someone leaves, you walk them to the door. This is an old, decent tradition where you walk someone out to the front door, to the gate, you say goodbye to them. You don't just give them food to eat and drink and then that's it. And in fact, the Vilna Gaon writes that if you, ashel, the first two letters are Aish, fire. Lamed for levia, you have to walk someone, say goodbye to them. If you don't do it, you're only left with Aish, fire. So, anyway. So it says, he planted an ashel in Beersheba, and there he publicized the name of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, the power that runs the world. A lot of people don't understand the names that they translate as God. They all have meanings. And Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is past, present, and future altogether. That means that if you exist totally in the present, the past also exists here, the future also exists here, and then you're fully connected with nature and with the Creator. A lot of people worry about the future, their energy is not in their body, it somehow leaves somewhere. People who worry about the past, they're not in here, their energy is somewhere else. If you want to be connected, you have to be living in the present, and that's what the name with Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, the tetragrammaton, the four letters that people know about as the very holy name, it actually means being totally in the present, 100% in the present. Anyway, then it goes on, Abraham lived in the land of the Philistines, the Plishtim, for many days. And the commentaries say it means 26 years. The Hebrew word for Palestine is Plishtim. The word Plishtim, Mavi Mefulash, it means open, it means to roll, it means pierce or search. Abraham lived in a place that was very open. You could do whatever you wanted. And because you could do what you want, you're also free to serve the Creator. No one disturbed him. So he lived in land Plishtim, a land that was open to live however you wanted. Now the Hebrew word for land is Aretz, and it's translated here as land. But the word Aretz, the Medrash explains, actually doesn't mean earth, as in the Adama, the physical earth. It has the word Rotz, to run, and Aleph, which means one. Which means, the Medrash says, the desire to do the Creator's will or to be in the oneness of the flow. So he lived in a land, it shouldn't be translated the land, but it should be in the place where he could flow with the desire of the Creator, of the oneness. And since people are open to anything. The Philistines lived a corrupt life, they were open to everything, and he lived the way he wanted. Yet, living in a society that's corrupt still puts certain limitations on a person. Even if you're doing what you want to do, you're limited in certain ways. As human beings, we have to have a structure. It's very nice people say we have a free society, we want to be for free. They're only fooling themselves. Free comes with a cost. If you don't take care of the structures, it becomes destructive. We're human beings, we have limitations, whether we want to acknowledge or not, whether we look at our own limitations, we have to. And Abraham was also aware of his own limitations, and the limitations the society and place he lived in put on him. But he basically lived a quiet life for many years. Now we know what happens when things are quiet in your life for a while. Something happens. And the higher power, the Creator, decided it was time to put that something in place. Now, there are things that have not happened because it's not the time and place yet. But once it's the time for it, it happens. So there are people who are chasing, I want to do what God wants, I want God to do this, I want the Creator this, I want this to happen. It doesn't happen the way you want it to happen. You can't chase it. You can chase it your whole life, but if it's not time, it's not going to happen. So you got to relax and have a little bit of patience to let life flow and not try to control it. But you're going to get surprises. So the story of Abraham and Isaac and the impact that their story has an impact for all future generations. The spiritual opening, the frequency, and how they reached it is something which is for all future generations. And that is some of what we're going to do. So let's start the story. We'll do a little bit tonight at least. Vayihi achar hadvarim eila. And it was after these matters. Now, the word Vayihi means, and it happened again. It was, or it came to pass. The word Yehi in Hebrew is actually future tense, meaning it will be. When you add the letter Vav, one letter, to the beginning of the word, it transforms it from future to past tense. And the same is the word Hoya. It was. It's a past tense, but when you add the letter Vav, then it becomes future tense. So in Hebrew, there's a lot of this back and forth, and we put out last week in Mekates, those who read my website on last week's portion, I also described the word Mekates. Everyone translates the end of 2 years. But what people don't understand is that Kates means end, but adding the letter Mem to it means, the letter Mem doesn't mean it was, it means from. What does it mean from end? It doesn't really flow. It means from beginning to the end of 2 years. The commentator said the Pharaoh dreamt for 2 years. So it actually, the Mem means from, and Kate's end, from the beginning to the end of 2 years. So it changes it from being just end as to being much more expansive, from beginning to end. And in Jeremiah, it actually uses the word Mekates as beginning of the 7 years. But anyway, so there, the idea of one letter transforming something from a past, from its tense to the opposite. Actually, the verse would read very well without the word Vayihi. It could just say, after these matters. It doesn't have to say, and it was, or and it happened, or whatever. It doesn't need that word Vayihi at all. Therefore, it's of interest to know why it uses the word Vayihi here. Vayihi reflects something that was before and is coming back. It connects the past through the present to the future. In that sense, Vayihi is a disturbance and a shift from what has been before in life for some time. In Genesis 1:3, which we gave one of the classes, it also brings Vayihi. Vayi'er, it was light. Or, we didn't translate the word as light, but Vayi'er was clarity. See, a lot of people translate the 6 days as days. We've explained that it doesn't mean days. It's the wrong translation, actually. It has a different meaning. But if there's no sun till the 4th day, how can you have sunlight before it? It doesn't mean light, it means clarity. And on the videos you can see how that flows in the sentences. But the word Vayihi means, if you use it as light, it means there was light before and it only came out now. But actually clarity is better, because Vayi'er, there was clarity. God created things which created confusion. There was a lot of confusion in verse 2. And then God, the Creator, had to bring clarity into it. So it existed before, it's just being brought out. That's the same word as being used here. Something existed and it's now. So it gives a kiyum and chizuk. It gives a strength to an existence. It reflects this world and the future world. Not just the future as in where we're living tomorrow and the next day, but the future world when everything transforms to a new dimension, or after the Messiah comes, however you wish it. In Ecclesiastes chapter 1, for sentence 9, it says, that which was, is, that which will be, and that which happened is that which will happen. The names may change, but that which happened in the physical spiritual realm remains dormant on some level till time comes for it to be expressed again. Vayihi is also an expression of pain. While disturbance can be painful, it can also bring delight. Life moves on and changes through disturbances. The word Vahaya is used to denote a sense of joy, and the word Vayihi is used to denote a sense of seriousness. So there are many different applications to these words. But in this story, it's very interesting. What is the shift that occurred here? Many years ago, he lived here 26 years quiet. So you don't hear the Creator talking to him. You don't hear anything. All the stories of God talking of the Creator many years ago. So he had a quiet time. Suddenly, the voice comes back. It hits him again after 26 years. That's a big jump. And so it creates a disturbance. What now? So the word Vayihi really is reflecting that the connection, the open communication that the Creator had many times is now come back. He's now having another communication of something that was dormant for many years. I've seen many times there are people that say, oh, I had an experience of God. They had it 10 years ago, 12, 15, 20 years ago, and they know there's a God because they had experience. They're living in the past, actually. What people don't understand is that a lot of times what we experience is not God, it's not the Creator, it's the energy that we've created. When you believe in something, you create an energy for that belief. So the more energy, the more thought and feeling you put into something, the more energy you create. And then when you experience the energy, you believe it's God, or you believe it's whatever. It's not. It's the energy you've created. We create spirituality and energy. And a lot of people get confused in that space. And that is another big issue that goes on. But that's not the story here, because Abraham was not attached to the energy he created. He was attached to the Creator, and it was by him there wasn't the blockage that people have, so it was very clear, but it's still a big disturbance. Then it says, Achar hadvar meil, after these matters. Achar means after, but Achar could also mean behind. Hadvarim, the letter Hey means the. Dvarim means matters, things, or events. Ha'ela is these. Ha'ela, the these. The letter has the, Ela means these specific, or those. So after these specific matters, what are the matters that are described in Torah before? You have that Sarah gave birth to a child at the age of 90. Abraham was told to send his son Ishmael away. Abraham made a pact with Philistines. These are things that happened somewhere in the past. Not immediately, but somewhere in the past. And so different commentaries go into what are these things talking about. And you find, quite interesting, a lot of midrashim and stories with the angel of death and with different angels and different forces. And they're all very nice stories. But it's not what it's talking about here. And a lot of those stories are because, I don't know why people like stories, but there are lessons in the stories, but the lessons are all of very low vibration. So, it's basically after some matters. Now, at this point, begins a new phase in his life. He had to deal with his son Isaac. This new guidance creates a personal disturbance to go on a new journey after he's lived for many years in tranquility. The previous time the words after these matters, Achad Varmela, is mentioned is in Genesis 15, chapter 15, verse 1. It says, Vayihi, and it happened again here. It doesn't say it over there. It doesn't use the word, it says after these matters, but it doesn't use the word Vayihi, a disturbance, like it uses here. But there, after these matters, brings a new stage into Abraham's life also. Hashem, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, appears to Abraham and talks with him in a vision. And here, after a period of silence, he communicates again and speaks with him. Now, in Genesis chapter 22, verse 20, it also says, after these matters, but there, it doesn't use the word achar, but it says acharei. It adds a yud to it. It means that after Isaac's experience, we are being told about Rebekah, since Isaac is ready to be married. Many people say the reason it has Rebekah's birth about Rebekah after this chapter is to say she was born at the same time. But that's just an assumption, not based on any fact other than an assumption and imagination, because it doesn't say that. It is actually an assumption, but it says there acharei. The verse talks about the people born into Rebekah's family in order to say who Yitzchak was going to marry. Therefore, when the word says acharei, it doesn't mean after. It says as in immediately after. It's acharei, at some point after. It's another subject. After this, we're going on to another subject. So if you realize that it's put an extra letter there to tell you it's a little bit different, the achar here is something which is immediate. There, it's something over time. So all those who want to say it happened at the same time are actually forgetting about this one dot that's actually there, which tells you it was just another story. And it's brought in to say who we married, but not to say it happened at the same time. As a side point, there are a number of people mentioned, and in chapter 22, verse 21, it mentions someone by the name of Utz, not potato chips. It says Job also lived in the land of Utz. Now, he lived a few hundred years after actually Abraham. It's possible he lived since the land of Utz existed, and Job lived in the land of Utz. He probably lived at some point after this period, but in relationship to this period, because that's when the land of Utz existed. And that could also be why there are several midrashim and stories that compare the stories of Job with the story of Abraham, with things that happened. They compare there to bring it here because it was about the same period. But there is no actual real relationship other than what people want to compare. So I'm not going to go into all those discussions. Now the word for after is achar. But achar can also be read as achar. Achar means a back, a behind. The verse is saying that behind, vayhi achar dvarim, behind these matters, not after, but what's behind it? What's behind what's happening? That what happened in the past is to bring matters to this point where Elikim Nisas Avram, God tested Abraham, but we'll show that it means something else. This point of Abraham's journey comes not just after, but because of the things that happened before. So that the things that happened before are behind it. So just telling stories of things that happened, this happened, that happened, they gave birth here, or Sarah gave birth, or Avimelech, that's after. But if you want to look at his journey, you have to see what's behind the journey, what happened with him, what's behind it that brought him to this point. So people don't translate as behind, but actually behind is a much deeper way of understanding it and looking at it. Another view of the words achar dvarim is after these matters, that it doesn't only refer to Abraham himself. The Torah is not a storybook. The Torah is a guide for all people. Therefore, when it says what's behind these matters, it's actually a lesson. It's teaching us about the journeys of all people. What's behind the journeys of all people. So that's why when you translate as behind, it's talking about everyone's life, reflecting it in your own life. It doesn't matter what happened with Abraham. If it happened, it didn't happen. It's a lesson you take. At the end of time, we'll all come to the place that Abraham and Isaac experienced. And we will, Rabbi Soloveitchik, I'll bring it in later, Rabbi Soloveitchik explains this whole story as that the main point of the story is that it was Abraham giving over the leadership to Isaac. It was a spiritual journey for both of them. And as you go through words, you'll see the journey that Abraham took and that Isaac took, a spiritual journey, where there's a transition of that spiritual power and spiritual leadership. And the word Hineni, the terminology used also is the same when Jacob gave over to, when Isaac gave over the blessings to Jacob, when he took over the blessings, he says Hineni, the same word, and the same thing by Yosef. We'll find that the transformational leadership is in the words used later on. Any questions? Okay. V'holi Kim Nisas Avraham, and God tested Abraham. Now, Elikim actually means a power of boundaries. It doesn't mean God. God is a very weird word, which really doesn't apply in most places in Hebrew. But Elikim is a power of boundaries or limitations. Nisa, translated as tested, also means was lifted, removed. S is not commonly translated, but it does have a translation with, or means to allow expression of, or the potential of, or support. Avraham, which, as we know in Hebrew, a name is not just a name for someone to call you, but it also is a reflection of the soul energy of a person. And you can often tell about the soul of a person through the name of a person. Now, the word Elikim, which represents a power of definition, discernment, boundaries, judgment, law and order, it's an expression of the creative force in creation. You have to understand, the Creator has no beginning, no end, no definition. Now, how can you create something or make something if there's no definition? So the first thing that has to happen is there has to be a power of definitions. Elikim, that name, reflects power of definitions. And in each case, in each instance in Torah, it's its own specific definition. It used in Torah as a genetic word, but it's very specific to each place. And in Kabbalistic texts, you can find different names and different combinations of what type of energies it is in each place. Now the word El means power. People say God, but actually El is power. Then after the word El, you have a dot called a cholam, which is on top of the other, of Haim. It's on top of the others. So it's a power of judgment, of law, of discernment. It's a power over others. Again, in my video on Genesis, I explain more, and I go more into the word Elikim, so I won't go much into it now. Other than it's a power over other things, a power over the flow, or a power of what's happening. There are different ways to read the letters in Hebrew. Now, it has the letter V ha'elikim. It adds a letter Vav, which means that what is happening here is drawn down from somewhere. The letter Yud is a dot. The letter Vav is that dot with a line that comes down. So it's here, or it comes down here. And that means that something from the Creator is being drawn down. So it doesn't say Elikim or the God, or the Elikim. It's V'Halikim. The extra Vav is put here to reflect what's being drawn down within the structure of the creation in order to be elevated. Now, the Hebrew word nes, which is translated as test, is actually written here in past tense. Not that he's going to, like him nisas Avram, he tested him. If you want to say God, Elikim is going to test, you say Manasseh, you're going to test. As it says in Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 4. But even more interesting is that in all the other places that people say Abraham had 10 tests, it never uses the word test. This is the only place. It has the word nes, and they translate it as test. Which means, since it's the only place used, that there is some other meaning in the word besides test, that it doesn't actually mean test here. It's about a journey that brings something forth that lies deep in a person. The idea of a test is to bring something out. In the sense that a test brings something out, that's a correct translation, but it's not what the word actually means here. Here it's to reveal a new frequency in the world. Essentially, yes. Want to say something? Essentially, the verse would actually read well even without the word Valikim Nesas Avram. It was after these matters, and Abraham heard a voice. You don't even need that part in the middle. Therefore, it suggests to look at other meanings in the Hebrew words, that it's not about a test. The word Nes, which I translate test, also means miracle. It means a banner, something that's flagged, raised, or made to stand out. Like in Isaiah chapter 62, verse 10, it says, raise a banner or flag over the peoples. And the word there is used Nes, the same word. Now there's something taken out of its, Nes means something taken out of its present place and made to stand up, to bring out an inner strength or quality in a person, something that you take notice of. So Elikim, in a sense, Elikim made Abraham into a standard bearer for the love of the Creator. So Elikim Nisas Avram doesn't mean God tested Abraham, but God made him a standard bearer for the love of God, of the Creator. Now, although life itself is a miracle, we use the word miracle when there's a change in the natural flow of events. People seem to take nature, it's natural, it happens, it's coincidence. Don't look at the miracle, that it's actually, life is, every breath is a miracle. And that's only due to people's perception of things. So here Abraham is singled out for a specific change in the frequency of life in the world that has not occurred until this point. Any questions? Okay. I am going to stop at this point. We will go on from this point next week. Is there anything anyone wants to say before I close the class? Yeah.
Rabbi, in the art scroll book.
Yes.
Little louder.
In the art scroll book, yes.
That goes with the I have no books.
Oh, okay.
That goes with the new year with throwing the Taj, the bread into
Okay.
the water. They talk about Abraham's going through a number of trials on his way to the Akeida.
Mm-hmm.
And they bring up the fact that water, the river, is supposed to symbolize the greatest of the trials.
Right.
And they bring this up for the fact that, and I don't know exactly what they say about it, but that water represents knowledge and he has to cut through the knowledge or something.
Right. Everything is symbolic of things. Sure. And each trial is symbolic of different things. If you look at them as trials, what we're saying here is that you can look at them as tests if you want. But when you look in the word here, there's no reason to say this actually means test. Because the other 9 tests, it doesn't say test. It's a word people made up to refer to it. So it doesn't make sense to say this is the final test when it doesn't actually say that. So that's why I'm looking into the word of Nes to show you that it actually has a different meaning. And that we'll see how the Creator had to bring out the power within Abraham, his spiritual connection, in order to help Isaac to bring out his connection. So Abraham had to do it first within himself, and then he could do it with Isaac. And that's difficult. That is not easy. That's why this journey is not an easy journey, but it is a spiritual journey.
And the Nisayin means a challenge too.
The what?
And the word Nes is a
Nisayin means a challenge, yes.
It's a challenge. So
Yes.
this can also, you can translate this as a challenge
You
for Avram Avinu, whatever you want to describe the challenge.
You can translate it as challenge if you wish. I wouldn't translate it challenge, and I'll tell you why. There are many things in life that are a challenge. Okay, there are many things that are very difficult. But how many times are we stupid and silly people and we do the most difficult tasks with a pure simplicity? Okay? There are many times we'll help a spouse, we'll help a child. We don't think about the difficulty. We don't think how hard it is. We just do it. Okay? You can't tell us it's a challenge. You don't think even those words. Those words just don't exist. You do it because it's a pure heart. And that's exactly what happened here. He was doing this with a pure heart. He didn't think about the difficulty. He didn't think about the challenge. Those words didn't exist. The Creator wants me
Accident.
to do it. I do it with my whole heart.
But
And that's what it
It's
is.
still a challenge because you don't know who would be successful.
Hold
doing
on a
it.
minute. In your mind, it's a challenge. That's your
Sure.
intellectual thing. Abraham did not think the word challenge. He didn't feel the word challenge. It didn't exist. Why would you say it's a challenge for him when it didn't exist in his vocabulary?
Because most people wouldn't do what he was supposed to
That
do.
doesn't matter. When you're translating it, you want to know what he thought and what he felt. So why would you translate it different from the way he thought or felt? Then you're not going to learn the right lesson. You're learning a good lesson, but you're not learning the lesson of Abraham.
So why do you use the word Nisalim?
That's what we're explaining. It
Yeah,
has,
but it has
has
variable
different
meanings.
meanings. And people translate them based on